Welcome to AIST's first Thought Leadership Lunch for 2016, Why Culture and Leadership Matters. As we can tell from the attendance today, this is a very hot topic for reasons that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Before I comment on that topic myself, I'd first like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Kiora Nation as the traditional custodians of these lands, and I pay my respect to the elders past and present. I'd also like to thank the industry partners without which today's lunch and ongoing lunches would not be run: Aberdeen Asset Management, State Street and Vanguard. Today's speaker will be thanked by a contribution with a donation to First Nations Foundation on their behalf. And we'd also love you to join the Twitter conversation today with the hashtag AISTLunch. Now I'd just like to very briefly comment on the topic, why culture and leadership matters. I was reading recently a quote which I thought was a great encapsulation of the issues here. Tone of an organisation, its culture and leadership is like a tuning fork. It reverberates from the top to the bottom, and it reverberates from the bottom to the top. The question that I'd like you to think about when thinking of that analogy is, do you know what your organisation's pure note is? How does it sound? What does it mean? And how do you know when your organisation is actually living out and singing that pure note? Do you know how that sounds? Why is this important? First of all, it's very important from the viewpoint of looking after our members. Not-for-profit funds, and I'm very proud to say I've worked for 5 of them in my working life, are a genuine wonder to me about how our behaviour and culture drives different outcomes which value our members. And that is really something that I personally feel very proud of, and I'm sure everyone in this room feels very proud of. We are here purely to advocate for the retirement savings of Australians in an ethical way. From a business perspective, that pure note is also very important because it gives us our competitive edge. What do we stand for? Why are we different? And how are we promoting ourselves to our members? With issues like the Productivity Commission's Default Fund Review, obviously knowing what that pure note sounds like and is it reverberating through our organisations and how do we know that it is very important. Now, the downside of culture. I would like to use a rather old-fashioned terminology, if I may, and call it the vultures of culture. If we have outside people coming into our organisations and telling us that our culture is not right, that is just picking at the bones, to be honest, and that's why I'm using the analogy of vulture in that sense. This is why our not-for-profit culture and hearing that tone is so important, because we do not want culture vultures visiting our way. The other thing which I think is also very important to our members is how can we demonstrate to them that our culture has made a difference to our behaviour. Someone at a conference recently mentioned to me, how about even something simple on the website about we had this decision and we decided it that way because of our value set. I know that sounds quite simplistic, but how do we actually promote the outcomes that we do based on our value set? Before I introduce David, I'd just like to briefly mention a familial cultural matter that applies to David. Apparently, he's got 2 sons who were 5 years apart but born on the same day. So I think we need to know something about his familial cultural values as well. Anyway, according to Deloitte's 2016 Human Capital Trends report, 82% of participants said that culture is a key competitive advantage. Now, I've spoken a little bit about that earlier. And I just reiterate that culture is not a human resource issue. It does reverberate up and down throughout the entire organisation. Today we have David Byrum from Human Synergistics Australia, which is a leading human resource consulting firm, which also helps transform organisations and their cultural change programs as well. So I'd like you to join with me today in welcoming David to the stage, and after his presentation there'll be a question and answer session. Thank you very much.
How do we go? We good? Perfect. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I was just talking to Brett over here, and I'm going to lead off with that because I thought it was a good way. What is culture and what is it? And it is the pivotal in the Deloitte report, and I almost did a Google search this morning. I like doing it for fun. Let's just Google culture today and see how many different hits come up about culture. Everybody's writing about culture, and they're not writing about culture, they're writing about leadership. But what is it that really drives an organisation? And I'll start at the individual level. When we come to work every day, there are 5 fundamental core things that we as individuals all want. And that's the underpinning of culture. And they are that I come to work today and I make a difference. I've come out of bed and I've got out of bed and the alarm's gone off and I've come in and I'm going to make a difference today. Number 2, related to that difference, is that what I'm going to do today is significant. It's meaningful. It's contributing to my fellow workers, it's contributing to my organisation, and it's contributing to the broader society. So not only do I see I make a difference, that difference is actually significant. Number 3 on that list is that I'm challenged. I'm supported, I'm growing, and I want to be challenged. Number 4 links to that support, and I talk about care. I know people around me care for me, all right? I'm okay to be challenged as long as someone's going to be there to support me, help me, and guide me, and that's where the leadership comes in. There is a 5th one, all right? And it's one of the most, they're all important, but I personally like it. I have a little bit of bias for the 5th one, and I'm quite an interactive, and you see that I've got the lapel mic, I'm not going to stand behind there. Anyone want to guess what that 5th one is? Have a punt. What do you think it could be? Who said it? Give that man the prize. All right? It is fun. I enjoy what I do. And the analogy I coin, I've got 2 sons. They are born on the same day, 5 years apart. All right? And they're also born on the same day as all the horses' anniversary, August 1st. When you wake up in the morning, what do you do with that doona? Do you get that doona off your head and wake up with the energy of a 4-year-old? And go, I'm going to make a difference today, it's going to be significant, I'm going to be learning and challenged, I'm going to be supported, and I'm going to do the best, I'm going to have fun. Or do you get the doona and pull out of your head and go, oh my God, not another day. I'm going to go into this environment and it's not allowing me to be my best. All right? And they are the 5 drivers of individual motivation that lead us to culture. So where am I going today? I'm going to talk about being future fit, and I'm going to set a bit of a context. For me, how many people saw my colleague in Adelaide? Show of hands. Oh, not too bad, all right? I've got a totally different presentation for the 3 of you. I was thinking that let's make it a little bit different. So I'm going to put a bit of context around being future fit and building a high-performing organisational culture. I'm going to lead off with this comment. Change doesn't need your permission to happen. It's going to happen to you. All right? But the good news is you've got a choice. All right? Change will happen. We all know it's going to happen. But your culture can support or inhibit your ability to perform in a changing market. I only have one question for every organisation I work with. Are you in charge of your culture, or is your culture in charge of you? And that's pretty much the nutshell. So we can be in charge of our culture and we can manage our culture. Or are you going to let your culture manage you? So, there's only one thing we can be safely predicted, that sometime soon your organisation will be challenged in ways which has no precedent. It's going to happen. It's happening to my organisation, where I work with Human Synergistics, and I was saying to Brett that I'm employed by Human Synergistics, but I'm one of a dozen of the consulting team where I work. There are 1,800 active users who use our diagnostic and licensed to use our products across Australia. And we are being challenged in the digital revolution and update, and we're still predominantly a research company. Context for today. I'm going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution a little bit. We've all heard about the World Economic Forum. The role of culture. I'm going to give you some data from the Australian data set that I have. It's a report card on Australia with regards to culture. The good news is I haven't taken out any of your organisational data. It's all in there. All right? So I know I work with some people in this room, but I'm not going to disclose any of your data, so you're okay. And then we'll talk about what we need to do in terms of going forward. So let's get into it. Our world is changing. The fourth industrial revolution, the World Economic Forum last year spent a lot of time on this and the face of disruption. I'm going to show you the face of disruption, who it is. The fourth industrial revolution, I'm sure, who's heard of the fourth industrial revolution? Yeah. About 20%. So what's happening? Okay, we had mechanical production powered by water and steam way back 18th century. It was like a joy, right? We're going to pump water on farming fields. And we had our farmer out there doing the work. All right, that was our first industrial revolution. Number two, some people talk about Henry Ford, and you can have a Ford as long as it's black and it's on a production line, you're good to go. We now got powered automation, production lines, and it was all about high volume. All right. Soon on we had our third, and we got email, and we got web, and we got everything. I don't want to show my age, but email didn't exist when I started working. All right. When I started working, there was not even a computer in the facility I worked in. But now we have this IT everywhere. So we went from, if you like, doing to sitting behind a screen, and that's the third industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution, cyber physical systems. What the hell does that mean? All right. So we're now in this totally different world. We're interfacing technology and the human body. All right. Technology and the human body are becoming one. There was an article in the New York Journal, the New York Times this morning that I picked up. 2 years ago, they inserted a chip into a gentleman that was quadriplegic, and they haven't found a cure for this, but they've inserted this chip, and through using the chip, he now has movement in his hand to play a guitar app. So they've inserted a chip into his body. All right. So it's the interface between us and machine. All right. So that's cyber civil technology, smart devices. It's happening. All right. It's there. Change is going to happen. All right. It's our choice to decide what we will do about it. It's around us all the time. Looking forward, what might we see 9 years from now? All right, this is pretty scary. This will be when my youngest son is 21. 10% of people will be wearing clothes connected to the internet. The first robotic pharmacist will be in the US. There'll be the first 3D printed car. Anyone who hasn't had a good Google and a look at what 3D printing is, I highly recommend you do it. In fact, you can design something now, send it off through email, and it'll be 3D printed and come back to you as your own personal design. Driverless cars. I do some work with the insurance companies. And let me tell you, they are thinking about this a lot. All right? Driverless cars, 10% of cars will be driverless in the US in 9 years from now. They already have proven that a driverless car will go around a racetrack in California faster than a Formula One driver. All right, it's there. The first 3D liver transplant will happen. First city of 50,000 people with no traffic lights. It's not Canberra, sorry. All right, we're going to have this city, all right? You can imagine the world is going to change. The first, is there any board members in the room? The first AI machine on the corporate board of directions. All right? The world. So how are we going to handle it? What are we going to do? Our true competitive advantage to look to the future is through our people. And this is where culture comes in. Our people behave in a way, all right, that creates this. So what is this face of disruption? All right? It exists, all right? But who is this face of disruption? Has anyone in the room heard of Thomas Sure as. All right? I'm going to introduce you to Thomas. And the reason I use this slide is it can come from anywhere. It's probably going to come from people you least expect it. All right? And there are some classic examples in the industry today. All right? I'm going to go straight to Uber. All right? Uber was capitalised at $50 million. I had this slide a little while ago, the last research for Uber, I think the capitalisation value now is at $85 billion. Uber don't own anything other than a platform. They don't own cars, they don't own infrastructure. Airbnb, capitalisation at $20 billion. I don't even think they're at $1 billion worth of revenue yet. All right? But they've got that capitalisation value. Marriott's taking almost 100 years. They've got a lot of capital, a lot of hotels, and they're in the same position. It can come from anywhere. This is the most interesting stat. 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies will be gone in 10 years. All right? Because disruption and change is happening. What allows us to be positioned for the change, though, is culture. So it's not all doom. Interesting bit of data. What's happening as we go forth, there's a decoupling of labour and productivity. So what's happening now is that productivity is increasing and labour is not. We were trending pretty much together and it's now decoupled. We're getting more and more as technology goes on and it's now decoupling. Who knows where that's going to finish? And I had to throw a finance slide in. So anyone from Deutsche Bank, I thank you very much for this slide. This is a financial slide, what's happening. And you can look at the expansion, the rapid change in the financial sector. Product life cycles are getting shorter. Innovation's happening faster. It's just spurring, going more and more and more. All right? I know clients that I work with now, they have dedicated teams working 15 and 20 years out on digital revolution and what's going on from a digital point of view. So, what does it mean for us? We all work today. We're not working in 15 years from now. What does it mean for us? Right now, the need for speed. All right? We need to be more agile, adaptable, scalable. Infobesity. Who's got more emails than they can read? All right? We've got this infobesity problem. All right? What is the signal? What's the noise? How are we going to separate it out? All right? What are the things I really want to look at versus separate all that other stuff that's just the noise it's building? I'm always on. This doesn't mean I want people working at midnight sending emails, but we're always connected now. It's this flexibility, we're always on. I think there was a stat, and I'm pretty sure I got it from the World Economic Forum, was that in 2020, more people have access to a mobile device than sanitation facilities. It's just what's going on in the world. So we're always there. The boundaries are gone. It's a virtual world. All right? It now truly is a virtual world. I was overseas earlier this year with my family. My 16-year-old son is now FaceTiming on multiple. He's got a new app actually. It's because he's now doing 5-way chats with people in Canada, California, Florida, Utah. Every Sunday morning he's up and going, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm just talking to these people overseas." It's a different world. Shifting balance of the power. Information no longer equals power. Everybody can get the information now. So it used to be the old organisational hierarchical, all right? What successful organisations are now realising is personal basis of power, not organisational hierarchical. Multi-universe, diversity, inclusion, it's relational, and we're getting breadth and depth, the skills churn. And we all would have heard about the skills churn. The skills our students are learning in university now will not be valid by the time they've finished university. They will be gone. So it's the breadth and depth. We've got to look to the future. The market has changed. So what does it mean? I've tried to present the individual, the organisation, and the market requirements. We want this high touch, we want this high concept from an individual, but we've got the organisational thing. So the individuals in our world, we want to create meaning for our customers and connection. The individual's doing all the thinking, and the organisation's doing the design and the doing. And there's a relationship between the two. So how does it pull together? I want individuals that are thinking creatively in a context. All right? I want to bring that context together. I want to get an outcome. So the organisation and the end user wants this outcome, but they also want empathy. I want them to understand me as a person. All right, I'm the customer, I want to be understood, and I want it to be collaborative, not one way. The market has changed. So, where does culture fit? And what's the role of culture? How does it all come together? All right. Culture, and a lot of people say, can you measure culture? The answer is yes. But what is culture? Culture is this invisible hand, all right? So you can't see it. It's a bit like gravity. We can't see gravity, but you know if I drop this remote, it's going to hit the floor, all right? Culture is the same thing, right? It's invisible. It's how people do things in your organisation to be successful, to be effective, to fit in here. What do I need to do? Now, you don't see it, but it impacts everything people do. From who do they go talk to when they want something to be done? Who do they involve when they want to actually get a project pushed through the pipeline? Who do they talk to when things are tough? All right? What are the processes and policies we're putting in place that influence that? Right now, your company, I say your company, is run on 21st century internet-enabled business. We've all got email, we're out there, all right? And this is thanks to Mr. Hamill. 20th century management practice processes on 19th century management principles. All right? We've got to look to the future. How do I present this? I sort of present it this way. We had cathedrals, all right? We were master builders of cathedrals. We had these cathedrals, but the world is now different. What does the world now look like? It's a bazaar. So the world has changed. And your employees, from a culture point of view, recognise this and they want to be in part of this changing world. So how do we pull it back in from a culture point of view? 2.0, we wanted to standardise, we wanted to specialise, we wanted alignment of goals, we wanted everybody on the same page. We had planning, we had a hierarchy, and we had extrinsic rewards. Now, what we're looking for is flexibility, variety, clarity of mission. I want to know as an employee what I'm doing in your organisation is for the greater good and I'm making a tangible difference. Those 5 variables I talked about. Power is now distributed out. It's faster, all right? We do experimentation now. How many people have played with IDEO, concept of IDEO? Anyone heard of IDEO? Design think tank, the IDEO guys? It's all about rapid prototyping, all right? So what we're doing now is we're experimenting, and it doesn't matter if we get it wrong, because if we get it wrong, we're going to learn from it and keep prototyping and getting it out there. And it's intrinsic, it's personal now, rather than extrinsic motivation and rewards. How does it work? What supports culture? Organisational culture allows us to get performance happening. Our mission and our vision, our articulation of that, the clarity of that is the sense of meaning, the importance of what I do. Organisational structure, how do I make decisions and how do I involve? How do I select and train? How do I reward? Or how do I punish in some circumstances? Autonomy, variety. It's my favourite one. Every organisation I go with, they said we want our people to be more innovative. Who would like their people to be more innovative? Some, all right? And then they go, but as long as they follow the processes and procedures we've outlined. I'm going, I've got a picture of your employee now, it's got a thought bubble above their head and it's going, what the? All right, do it all, be creative, be innovative, but stick to the processes. Whatever you do, don't go outside the mould. Communication, upward, down, it's the tuning fork, right? It's the communication up, down. The leaders, our teamwork, cross-functional motivation and satisfaction. What happens if it's not working? The culture reinforces the status quo. Keep it the same. Don't change. All right? And a lot of organisations saying, we'll be okay, we've just got to ride it out. All right? We don't need to change. Staff are disconnected from the vision and mission. They don't see it as real. It doesn't become personal. All right? Structures create hierarchy and centralised rather than distributed. Training is not subjective or transparent. Neither is promotion. No reward for effort. Specialisation, do the process way, don't think outside the box. Communication is filtered. Leadership is designed to control silos. We end up with disengaged teams not working together. I'm going to mix these up. So the numbers are important. Just watch the numbers, 1 to 12, because a lot of people mix them all up. All right? Oh, this slide took me hours. Culture is airborne. All right? It's quite infectious. It's so good, I'll show you again. I was talking to Brett earlier around culture and leadership are two sides of the same coin. They work hand in hand. And a new leader comes into an organisation with or maybe a new leadership team, and it's like, we're going to change the organisation. We're going to make it better. And they push up against the culture. And the culture says, well, no, we can't do it that way. No, that's not the way it's done around here. We've got to follow this way, right? And the culture starts influencing the leader, and the leader all of a sudden becomes part of the culture and says, no, we can't do it that way. We've got to do it this way, all right? They're double-edged sword. They both work hand in hand. It's not what you say as a leader, it's what you do. And just to extend that logic one step further, we're all leaders. Everyone in the organisation is a leader. Rather than it's what you do, what it is, I'm going to think in reverse a little bit. It's what you don't do as a leader. It's what you acknowledge or what you accept or what you don't address, all right, in terms of that as a leader. Couple of things on how this works when I spread these 12 elements. There's a lot of confusion in the market between engagement and culture. All right, and often people will use the words interchangeably. They are very different things, all right, and they measure different things. They're both important. So when I put it out there, they're both important, but one's a lag or an outcome indicator, and one's a lead or a driving indicator. So engagement, all good consultants have an iceberg, so I've passed that test. Engagement outcomes, all right, are up here. So outcomes are what we're seeing above the line. So it's how motivated is my workforce, how satisfied is my workforce, what's the teamwork that's going on, how adaptable and nimble are we. That's engagement. Culture is the norms and values that sit just below the iceberg. All right? It's the unwritten rules of behaviour. How do I behave in the organisation? Deeper down in the iceberg is what we refer to as causal factors. These are the drivers of your culture. These are the variables that are actually going to create your culture and in turn create your outcomes. So think of it from cause to effect to impact. All right? Where I'm going to spend most of my time today is below the iceberg, talking about culture and causal factors. So I'm going to spread them. Often I get asked, well, we're working on engagement. I say, great, use engagement as a measure. It's fantastic. But don't expect your culture to change through your engagement. All right? People can be highly engaged but still behave in a very dysfunctional way. All right? So behaviour, all right, is all about how I behave. Do I share? Do I collaborate? I can still be motivated, but I'm going to be very dysfunctional. Going to spread them around. I've kept the numbers on this chart. So now I've got 2 through to 8. All right? They are becoming the drivers of culture. So the articulation of our mission, how we actually set up our organisational structure for involvement and decision making and empowerment, how we actually do our selection and training, our reward systems, our way we design our jobs, our communication practices and leadership are the drivers, the lowest level we want to look at. They in turn create our culture. So we're going to work on these to influence this, and then we end up with our teamwork, which is our outcomes of our culture. And then we end up with our effect on the end to get that. Everyone see I've split them out now? So we're going to work on drivers to create our culture, which gives us our outcomes in line with the iceberg. How many people have seen this before? Or probably from an LSI experience. It was a wonderful experience, right? I did my first LSI in 1989. Did someone say, that's a long time ago. And I haven't, it changed me way back then. I've only been working for Human Synergistics for 4 years, but I've been using the diagnostics consistently for about 20 years. So in essence, this is how we measure culture. And what does it mean? Where are you investing your time, effort and energy? Are you all about task? Are you all about people? So we spend time on the task side or the people side. What are your needs? What are you trying to meet? Are you trying to meet higher order needs in your organisation, satisfaction, growth, development of people, or lower order needs around security? Stay out of trouble, keep out of trouble, follow the rules, don't rock the boat. All right? So we end up with clusters at a macro level. Do we set challenging goals, value creativity, be supportive, build relationships? Do we avoid conflict, conform, follow the rules, push decisions, avoid blame, which we'd say is passive defensive? Or do we go aggressive defensive, gain status by being critical, point out flaws, compete against others and avoid mistakes? So you've got a picture of the three clusters, all right? Obviously the most effective cultural cluster is constructive. An organisation that lives here, I say, is sustainable. An organisation that lives down in the passive defensive culture, I define as vulnerable, because the world is moving and the organisation is not. An organisation that predominantly spends all their time in the aggressive defensive cluster, I define as volatile. All right? They'll have a great year and then a bad year, and a great year and then 3 bad years. Report card. Let's look at some Australian data. How does it look? We measure outcome and culture. So one of the key things for us is, where are the outcomes going? So there's the picture again. Mission and philosophy, all right? How good are we doing at this mission and philosophy stuff? This is Australian data. Here are the bottom 10% of organisations in terms of mission and philosophy. People are saying in their organisation, we do not have a clarity of our purpose is not significant, we don't know why we exist, I really struggle with why I'm in the organisation. The top 10% of organisations for Australia, these are organisations saying, yes, we are kicking goals, we know our purpose, we know what we're doing. That is the culture profile of the bottom 10. That is the culture profile of the top 10. So you can see, the clearer our mission and philosophy, the more constructive my culture profile will be. Structures and involvement. And it gets a little bit monotonous after this, because there's the bottom 10% for decision making and involvement and empowerment. There's the top 10% for Australia. There's the culture of the bottom 10, and there's the culture of the top 10. If I look at communication, here is the bottom 10, here is the top 10. So what's the report card? What does that actually mean? So we've got to do more of providing a sense of meaning for what our people do on a day-to-day basis. Our people at all levels on the organisation must, and that's why I started today around significance of difference. We've got to do more around the meaning we're creating for our people. We've got to increase the opportunities for our people, all right? We've got to bring them into the fold, allow them to decide what they're doing and how we'll do it. And we've got to do a complete rethink about how we communicate. Communicate from a context that's going to create learning, create education, create development. Leadership. Everyone talks to me about leadership. Here's the bottom 10, and here's the top 10 for leadership. And here is the circumplexes of the top 10 and bottom 10 for those organisations. I've actually put some outcomes across here to show people what it looks like. All right. Here's teamwork. All right. You can see the top 10 are doing well. The yellow bar here is the Australian average. The purple arrow is the global average. So in some respects, we're about average at a macro level. Inter-unit coordination. How well do we work across different teams in our organisations? So not within my team, but across teams. Does marketing work with sales and sales work with IT and all the rest of it? This was concerning. The Australian average is well below the global average. Motivation, motivation, we're also well below the Australian average. So the Australian average is well below the global average. Satisfaction's about the same. And external adaptability, we are not as nimble as we could be or should be. What does it look like? In essence, mission and vision. Australia, in the data set we're looking at, is 65% of organisations are below the average. Reinforcement systems, reward systems, I've only picked the big ones, so how we reward, how we acknowledge, how we actually talk to our people, where 63% are below the average. Job design, this is my autonomy, my favourite one around creativity, creating people opportunity, 74% below the average. And leadership, 73% below the average. All right? And there was an article, a report that came out last night I saw it for the first time last night from the Australian Industry Group on leadership. And it just backed all of that data up. All right? So where do our opportunities lie? Mission, reinforcement, job design, and leadership. What does it mean? How do I pull it all together? So pulling it all together, if we want a business done better, we're going to have to find ways as leaders in our organisations to develop meaning for our people. All right? We want to provide a context where people can add meaning to what they're doing. Structures that allow people to be involved and truly feel involved. You can't say, I want discretionary effort if you don't give discretion. Everyone goes, I want people to show all this discretionary effort. How much discretion do you give them? None. I just want their discretionary effort. Build HR systems that challenge the status quo rather than live in the existing. Move away from management by exception towards management by excellence. What I mean by this, and this is probably one of the biggest awakenings for me, because I do my feedback and get my feedback, it's very easy to manage by exception. Tell me all the things we should have done, then tell me the things we haven't done that we should have done. And let's go through them. But a constructive organisation, an organisation that's truly constructive, will recognise all the things that people are doing and manage the excellence as well as identifying the gaps. Design jobs so they're inherently motivating. I get the doona in the morning and I'm going to have a good day. I'm going to have fun. Build communication systems that allow us to encourage and share. Develop our leaders, particularly our frontline leaders, to get the best out of our people. We're all leaders, and the frontline leaders is probably where some of the biggest opportunities lie. Create cultures that then allow us to have teamwork, cross-functional coordination, and are motivated to be part of. It's pulling it all together. Let that gentleman take his snap. And the only thing I can safely predict is that sometime soon your organisation will be challenged in ways you haven't thought of yet. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That certainly gives us food for thought. I'll just take the privilege of asking the first question and then I'll open up the floor to questions as well. David, we work in a very outsourced environment. Superannuation is significantly outsourced to insurance, to admin, to investment managers, to custodians and so on. How do we ensure that the organisation that we outsource to has a similar culture set to our own?
Great question. First thing I say is you're not on your lonesome. Everybody's outsourcing. Everybody's pushing stuff out. So you're not alone. And the way I'd answer it is twofold. A, what expectations are you creating for your outsourced partners in terms of the culture you want them to exist? So you've got to create a framework in terms of how do we want you to behave, is number one. Now, if I'm actually setting expectations how I want my outsourced providers to behave, number two would be how are you measuring their behaviour? So do you actually measure the behaviour of your outsourced providers? So do you actually understand what's going in for your outsourced providers in terms of how they are behaving? And you ask them for those measurements and those behaviours. And then you can address it.
Thank you. I'd now like to open up the floor to questions. There's one down the back here.
Bruce Murphy from Insight Investment. David, I appreciate that 5-point checklist because it's hard to put your finger on culture. We're all in the business of protecting and growing wealth, so I'm actually interested in if you've got any similarly simple thing about risk culture, because the regulator's really pushing down a lot about risk culture, so any comments would be welcome.
You know, I was asked, what question don't you want to be asked? And I said, there's no question I haven't been asked, because I've been asked before. I've been asked the risk culture question. I've lost lost count the number of times I've been asked it. I've been asked the same about a safety culture. I've been asked the same about an innovation culture. I've been asked the same around a culture that allows people to be their best. So the first thing, I'm going to answer it in a couple of parts. There is no such thing as a risk culture, all right? There is culture. You can't separate risk out as a discrete entity, all right? Culture is culture, innovation is part of culture, risk is part of culture, safety is part of culture. So that's my first part to it. And by virtue, and Karen's tuning fork example, I go around the world and I ask organisations to define what type of culture they want. And for a little bit of research, fun, and creativity, I've actually asked organisations, I've set up groups and teams to define the best culture you want. Go. I want you to, as a group, to define the best risk culture. Go. I want you as a group to define the best innovation culture. Go. And guess what? They all come back the same. So your best risk culture will be a culture that allows people to actually achieve and excel and do their best, to actually manage and understand the risk and bring it together. One that allows me to be open and transparent and collaborative and work in an environment where I can feel people have got my back. And finally, and they're all equally important, one where I can come to work and I can truly feel I can be me and flag a potential risk if it's there, rather than hide it. This long answer to a very good question.
Thanks, Peter.
There seems to be a bit of a culture war at the moment going on between ASIC, who've recently put boards on notice that they're responsible for culture. Boards have pushed back and said, we're only in the business 6 to 8 days a year, how can we be responsible? CEOs blame rogue elements. I think the Target CEO took the fall for a cultural failing. So
Yep.
who is responsible for culture in your opinion?
Everyone.
All right, if culture goes wrong, who is responsible?
Everyone.
Peter.
Who's accountable then? I'm going to pin you down on this one.
All right. And it depends if you. Thanks for having some fun. It depends on where you draw the line between governance and ownership and responsibility. All right. So in terms of measuring and driving and keeping people, if you like, open and from a governance point of view, the board plays a very, very key role. All right. In terms of making sure that the culture is not super aggressive or super passive and responding to that. So the board should be getting some data saying, well, how are we confident that the culture in this place does encourage what we want in terms of, and you define your own culture. Let me put out there, organisations need to define their own culture. I can tell you what it will be because I've done it so many times, but the board's going to be the governance and checking around, are our people being supported, are our people growing, are we hitting our goals, do we create an environment where creativity and whatnot is. The drivers of the culture, and then it needs to come, the leadership team need to fully embrace that culture and live it and role model it. So that leadership one down the bottom here, that 73% below, 74% below average, that's the leaders actually living and actively role modelling culture. So the leaders need to do it. If the leaders don't do it, the culture won't change. And then the people who report to the leaders also need to be given the permission to actually embrace and behave in that way as well. All right, so it flows down. So it's a really good question. The board has governance responsibilities and should be keeping some check, and this is my opinion, in terms of checking and making sure it. So there is responsibility there. The leaders have responsibility of setting the tone and actually making sure we role model what we want, which should be aligned to what the board's expectations are and the expectations of the employees in the organisation. And then the next level down leaders, next level leaders, and so forth. And I'll put this to you, and we know through research, if I surveyed your frontline employees and asked them for their preferred culture, and I asked your CEOs for their preferred culture, so the exec team, and I asked the board for their preferred culture, what culture would you want in the organisation? I get exactly the same. All right, and it's that fan of constructive. It's all constructive. I get exactly the same from all levels. But everyone has a responsibility in terms of checking and making sure we're all okay?
So, question.
Everyone.
Peter Brook, just harking back to Karen's first question, which if I can paraphrase, was something like, how do you ensure that your outsourced provider has the same culture? So the question to you is, are you advocating that all of the business relationships and associates that you deal with should have the same culture as you, or, to extrapolate that, that we will end up with a universal culture?
No. Because you might have a very constructive culture and all your outsourced providers might be non-constructive. So you don't want the same culture. You want everybody to be working towards a constructive culture, a culture in which we're allowing people to grow and be their best and hit those goals. So do I advocate, or you might flip it, you guys might have a very aggressive culture, all right? And your outsourced provider might be very constructive, all right? And you want your outsourced provider to become aggressive. Your outsourced provider would probably not want to work with you if that was the case. They would probably elect to say, sorry, we don't want to work with you. So no, I'm not advocating the same culture. What I'm advocating is that you as an organisation need to be clear about how you want your outsourced providers to behave with you, all right? Which should align to the behaviours that you expect of your own people. So if you've got behaviours of your own people in the organisation, your outsourced provider providing you the services and the needs you need should have the same behaviours of what you expect, which will be preferred, aspirational.
Question down here. Jane?
Hi, Jane Byrne from PFS. My question sort of links to an HBR article I saw this week. Harvard Business Review has got a cover story about culture and can you fix it? And it says, no, you can't fix it. You may have seen that article. I just wondered whether they seem to say that what you have to do is deal with the problems of the organisation and then that will lead to an improved culture.
Yeah.
Would you like to make a comment on that?
I haven't actually seen that article as yet, but I'm sure I will very shortly when I get out of here. There's so many articles. And keeping it on top of articles, it's very hard. It depends on how they've defined culture, right? So to be honest, I need to read the article to answer your question effectively, because they might be talking about engagement, all right? And you've got to work on something below the surface. So you think about the iceberg, all right? If I want to fix all those engagement metrics up there and all the outcomes, I've got to work on the cause of it. So I'd agree, if that's where the article is going, I'd 100% agree with the article. You've got to work on the levers that drive culture, which is the clarity of our mission, how we involve, how we empower. Those variables are put up there earlier. There are 31 levers that I play with when I look at an organisation from a culture point of view. And then I use them as lead indicators to a behaviour index, which is culture, which is also lead, to the outcomes, which is the lag indicator. So if the article's talking about, I've got to work on the drivers, I completely concur and I'd agree with it. But I do believe you can fix culture. And in fact, the father of culture is a gentleman by the name of Edgar Schein. People might have heard of Schein, Edgar Schein. He was a great advocate of saying you can't measure culture. Until he found us about 18 months ago, he's now said, yeah, you probably can measure culture. And if you want to get on some good clips around culture, I'd recommend you go to cultureuniversity.com. And it's got some clips there of Edgar Schein and Rob Cook, who talk about culture from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. So it's the aspirational, what are we seeing, feeling, as well as what do we know. And that'll give you some more data as well.
Any other one last question? Back over here.
Thanks so much for the presentation. What I was really interested in, you spoke about how culture is not always so much about what you do, but what you don't do. Could you share us some examples of that, and ideally in a super or financial services context?
The answer to that question is yes, I can, but how do I do it without putting any organisation in trouble? Sorry? Yeah, true. work we work with in clients. There's a client that I'm working with that's expanding very rapidly at the moment, and what they're growing rapidly, and their culture's quite aggressive. And what they're actually not doing, and it's a tautology about do something or don't do something. What they're not doing is actually reinforcing expectations of their new leaders. All right. So what's happening? This organisation's growing, and it's great. It's a pretty good story, but it's a pretty volatile culture. They're growing, and they're not. Their leadership team, and I've had great conversations with them, saying you've got to reinforce the new expectations, because the biggest gripe the leaders have is our new leaders aren't doing their new job; they're doing their old job. And I'm going, I know, because that's what you're rewarding every day. All right. So it's the fact that they're going, well done. You've got a new client in the door and sales are up again. So I'm the leader who's just been promoted. Now I should be overseeing all these other people who are now doing the agreement and the deals, and it's in financial, all right? And now, so they're all doing their old job and they're not developing anybody. So the leaders are not setting expectations for these guys and not rewarding the new expected behaviour. They keep rewarding the old behaviour. And because I know I can do it and I do it well, that's why I probably got promoted, I'm going to do what I did well. And it's a very competitive culture. In our language, it's highly task orientated, highly competitive. So people get rewarded for standing out. So the more I can stand out and be successful, the better I am in the organisation. So guess what? The more they do it to stand out, to be better in the organisation. So the leaders are not calling out the new expectations and then measuring people to those new expectations. They're accepting. All right, and I said, you've got to change it. And it sounds easy. In some respects, it is pretty easy. This is where I like the IDEO principle. Start. If you start doing something, you can mould it as you go and get through. Does that answer your question? Without trying to drop... Good question.
Thanks, David. I find it really interesting to think about, does our organisation actually know our cultural set and how we're assessing it? And also in relation to our outsourced providers as well. Being a very regulated industry, we do know things like how many seconds have we answered the phone, or have we done this yet, or have we implemented my favourite at the moment, Regulatory Guide 97. All those sorts of things we know. But do we know the things that David has raised today? And I think that's a very interesting question to go back and think about. So I'd ask you all to join with me in thanking David for an excellent presentation. A donation will be made to First Nations Foundation, and